Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim, Habaim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah. We are on the bottom of Daf, Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph, 3 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as Zchut for the Refuah Shelema of Rachel Simcha bat Nahid, Michael ben Nahid, Rachel bat Edna, Esther Bracha bat Chaya, Rabbi Avraham ben Tajgol, that should all have Refuah Shelema betoch Shar Choli Yisrael. Amen. Today's Amud is also dedicated for the Aliyat Neshama of Jacqueline Bat Avraham Vagdas. This week's learning of the community has been dedicated graciously by the Shea family, Dayan family, Kohen families. Should be an ultimate zchut for all their mishpachot. Bezrat Hashem. Amen. So we started the discussion of our Mishnah that Barishona, in the beginning, the time of the Bet HaMikdash, we had one day of taking lulav, etrog, hadas, v'arava, arbaat minim in the country, and 7 days was in Lifnei Hashem, in the makom of the Mikdash, and Hitkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was the Nasi of the generation. He instituted that they should be taking lulav, hadas, v'arava 7 days during the course of the entire Chag, everywhere. Not just Lifnei Hashem, but everywhere should be taken 7 days. So that's one takana that he had. Parenthetically, it's interesting to think, just this morning coming here, I was thinking that Chazal say that the Kruvim on top of the Aron, they reflected the relationship that Am Yisrael had with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when we were doing well, they were facing each other. When they were not, they would turn away from each other, and so on. And the Midrash says that when the Oivim came to destroy the Mikdash and to take the Aron, the time of, now you have to figure this out, because this is obviously, we're talking about the Bait Rishon, and the Aron was Nignaz, but in that time, maybe before, the Keruvim were actually hugging each other. In the darkest of the moments, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the closest. And so maybe to just think in those terms that the Lifnei Hashem usmachtem Lifnei Hashem Elokechem Shivat Yamim, 7 days being happy in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is in Lifnei Hashem, when the Shechina is, when Makom HaMikdash, that's when you have the mitzvah 7 days. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, in a deep and fundamental way, it's not just to remember the Bet HaMikdash, but saying that this is now Lifnei Hashem. Whereas when the Bet HaMikdash was there, Hashem's concentration, so to speak, was in Makom HaMikdash. Now, that concentration is everywhere. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Karov Hashem Lechol Korav, Lechol Hashem. He is now living amongst the Mikdash of a Bilbavi Mishkan Evne, of the hearts of a Jewish people. The Shachanti Betocham Mamash. In that way, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is even closer in Galut, like the Zohar HaKadosh says. We read in the Keta of Patach Eliyahu, says, you think that from the day that I destroyed my house, Bet HaMikdash, I went up there and I'm sitting alone. No, it's not like that. Heshchinta begaluta, I'm with them until the day, from that day, until the day that the Bet HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt, I'm going to be with you in Galut. In that intensity of the presence of Shekhinah is there. So in a fundamental way, the Takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai perhaps is the most heartwarming of the concepts. So remember that now it's Lifnei Hashem Elokechem everywhere. Hashem is with you literally in every nook and cranny of Galut, wherever you go. It could be Babylonia, it could be Yavan, it could be Rome, it could be Los Angeles, Ira Kodesh, it could be Ira Malachim. Everywhere that you are and you go, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with you in that way. It's something very profound to think about. But that's the first takana. The second takana is Yom Hanaf Kulo Asur. That the day of Tetzayin Benisan, the second day of Pesach, is going to be completely asur to eat chadash when you don't have the Bet HaMikdash. Now, the way we explained it was that in the time of the Bet HaMikdash, you would wait for the Korban HaOmer to be brought. If you knew that the Korban HaOmer was brought already, you could eat chadash. If you don't know that it was brought, you're far away, then you would wait until Chatzot and you would do it yalla. That would be the general notion of the heter of eating chadash in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. Once the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said it should be asur until the night. Now, the first approach to the Gemara was why? Because machali banei HaMikdash. It's the entire thing is a takana. It's not midoraita. Midoraita, when the Beit HaMikdash is not there, the morning, right? Ha'ira mizrach, it's mutar midoraita. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had to institute a derabanan because maybe when Beit HaMikdash is going to be built, people are going to make a mistake and come to eat it earlier than Korban HaOmer, and the Gemara went through figuring out when the Beit HaMikdash would be built for this mistake to be a plausible mistake to happen, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had to prevent that by making this takana. And we ended with the fantastic words of Rashi, that Rashi says basically, how is Beit HaMikdash going to be built at night? How is it going to be built on Yom Tov? Because the maskara of the Gemara was, it's either going to be built on the night of Tet Zayin, or in the evening time, a few minutes before the night of Tet Zayin, in the Tet Vav in the evening, which is Yom Tov. So it's either Yom Tov or night. And the Gemara in Shavuot says the Beit HaMikdash is not going to be built neither in Yom Tov nor at night. So how do you figure that out? Said Rashi, that's only when you're building it. But when Hashem is building it, it's not going to be a problem in the language of Rashi. This is going to be the two lines up from the bottom. Aval mikdash ha'atid shanu mesapin. The one that we're awaiting its coming is banui shuchlanu. It's already built and sophisticated with all of its details. Yegaleh ve'yavo mishamayim. It's going to be revealed and come down from Shamayim. Shenemar mikdash Hashem korenu yadecha. This is how we end it. So that's one approach in the takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, which would indicate that mideoraita, it is mutar when Beit HaMikdash is not there from the morning of Tet Zayin. Midarabanan, he instituted the wait the day of Tet Zayin until the night. Second approach is completely different, and that is that of Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak. So let's take a look. Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, he disagrees. Says no. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai b'shitat Rabbi Yehuda. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai holds like the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, Amara, and the Amar min Torah hu asur. Rabbi Yehuda holds, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai follows, that when you don't have the Beit HaMikdash, it becomes worse. When you have the Beit HaMikdash, Chadash is mutar, the moment you bring Korban HaOmer. When you don't have the Beit HaMikdash, it's asur until the night of that same day of Tet Zayin. How so? How did you figure that? So it says the Gemara, Dichtiv, as the Pasuk says, Ad etzem hayom hazeh. The Pasuk says that you cannot eat lechem vekali vekarmel ad etzem hayom hazeh. What's etzem hayom hazeh? Why don't you just say ad hayom hazeh? Why do you have to say ad etzem hayom hazeh? Ad itzumo shel yom. Until that day in its totality. And kasavar, and he holds that this ad etzem hayom hazeh means ad ve'ad bichlal. Means it's until and until included. So you can't eat chadash ad etzem hayom hazeh until the 16th of Nisan, and 16th included you can't eat. It's like sometimes when you have ad, it's until the beginning of it. Sometimes when you have ad, it's until the end of it. So which until is this? So it says ad itzumo shel hayom hazeh means that until the end of Tet Zayin. So whereas when you have the Beit HaMikdash, you will wait until Korban HaOmer. That's the second part of the pasuk. So ve'lechem ve'kali ve'karmel lo tochelu. Don't eat the chadash ad etzem hayom hazeh until the end of Tet Zayin v'ad bichlal. Ad haviyachem et korban Hashem Elokechem is coming to say, well, if you already brought Korban HaOmer, then you could do it earlier. If you brought Korban HaOmer by Chatzot, then you could do a Chatzot. If you did it by the morning, early on, you could do it early on. But if you don't have Korban HaOmer, in lieu of Korban HaOmer, you would wait until the end of Tet Zayin. And that, says Rabbi Yehuda, is the Oraita. The Pasuk is saying that. So it's not a Takana de Rabbanan that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made, but it is just telling you what Midoraita is. Now, what is the massive problem with that? What's the massive problem with that? What was the language of the Mishnah?
That he made it a crime.
It's, yeah. So Miyom Shchada, Hitkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. What does that mean? So let's read through the Gemara, not get ahead of ourselves. So says the Gemara, Ad etzem hayom hazeh ad yitzumo shel yom v'kasavar ad v'ad bichlal. He holds when it says ad until, it means until end the day of Tetzayin included. Gemara says, wait a second. Umi savar lak vateh. Really? You want to say that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai holds like Rabbi Yehuda? That is Isur Deoraita until the end of Tetzayin? Ve'ha miflag paligale. He argues with him. And he argues with him in a clear way. Says the Gemara, Nidnan, as we have it, Mishechara bet HaMikdash. This is our Mishnah. Mishechara bet HaMikdash, hitkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, sheyehe yom hanaf kulo asur. It's a takana that he made. It's not the Oraita. So Amar lo, and the Braita follows there. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda argues with this assessment of the Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. V'halo min haTorah hu asur. So what do you mean hitkin? Halo min haTorah hu asur. It's asur midoraita. Dichtiv ad etzem hayom hazeh, as the pasuk says, ad etzem hayom hazeh, and which means ad itzumo shel yom, which means ad vad bichlal. It's until the end of that day. It says no. Rabbi Yehuda. So why I say two things here. A, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's language is hitkin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. The Mishnah says that he instituted this, which means it's the Rabbanan. That's A. B, do you know who argues with him? Rabbi Yehuda argues with him. So how can you tell me that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai holds like Rabbi Yehuda when the one person that argues with him is Rabbi Yehuda? Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, how can you say such a thing, that this is a takara de Rabbanan, when I know that's the Oraita? I hold that's the Oraita. Because it says, Ad hayom hazeh ad yitzumo shel yom. So this is like a twofold, powerful question. How can you even suggest that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai holds like Rabbi Yehuda, when A, the language doesn't fit. The language is hitkin Rabban Yochanan, which means he instituted. Not that it is midoraita. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's doraita. And secondly, Rabbi Yehuda comes out arguing with him and says, you are wrong. It's doraita. So how can you say he holds like Rabbi Yehuda? One says, no. Rabbi Yehuda misunderstood Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He thought that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying, look, now that the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, we are going to make a takana like this. Wrong. Rabbi Yehuda hu deqatai. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that misunderstood Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Hu savar, he thought that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is suggesting that we should do this midarabanan. Midarabanan kama. Velo hi, and it's not correct. That's not what he meant. Veha hitkin kamar. The Gemara says, at the end of the day, you have to deal with the language. You could say that Rabbi Yehuda misunderstood him, but the language of the Mishnah that we had in Amud Aleph is pretty strong, right? Right? So how do you deal with the language of the Mishnah? Well, says no. Hitkin means darash. It means he said, look, until now we were doing Korban HaOmer because we had Korban HaOmer. But now I will reveal to you what the Torah really means. He darshened this pasuk properly, and therefore he says, from now it's changing. Not that I'm changing it, it is changing. Darash v'hitkin means now we have to establish this, that from now on it's going to be different based on this drasha. So the Gemara says, Hitkin kamar, the language of Hitkin means my Hitkin, darash v'hitkin, that means he darshened this pasuk, he explained it, that now for hundreds of years, for 410 years we have had the Beit HaMikdash, so we're kind of like born into having Chadash after Korban HaOmer, but now that the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, we have to have this announcement, this drasha, that now it goes back to being at the entire day of Tetzayin is going to be Asur Midoraita. Fine. So those are two ways of understanding the takana, or the psak of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai of Chadash being Asur nowadays until the end of the second day of Pesach, which is Tetzayin Benisan. Fine. Next Mishnah. Yom Tov HaRishon Shel Chag, Shchal Yod Shabbat, Kol Ha'am Molichim Et Lulavihen LeBeit HaKnesset. If the first day of Chag falls to be on Shabbat, first day of Chag falls to be on Shabbat, people take their lulav sets to the Beit Knesset from Erev Shabbat, from Friday. And they put it there in a way that they're going to recognize which one is which, right? למחרת משכימים ובאים, כל אחד ואחד מכיר את שלו. Tomorrow morning, they wake up early in the morning, they come to the Beit Knesset, and each person recognizes which set of lulav is his. ונוטלו, and he takes his lulav, מפני שאמרו חכמים, אין אדם, why is it such a big deal that everyone has to recognize their lulav? At the end of the day, it's lulav etrog hadas v'arava. You know, whoever comes first should pick the nicest one, right? Aside from the fact that you have Choshev Mishpah questions over here, but says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, this is a very specific thing. It's not just because of integrity or Choshev, it's because that's the halacha of lulav etrog v'arava. You cannot be yotze with somebody else's on the first day of Chag HaSukkot. Because Chazal said, "En Adam yotze yedei chvato b'Yom Tov HaRishon." You cannot fulfill your obligation in the first day of Yom Tov belulavo shel chavero, with the lulav of your friend. V'shar yomot HaChag, but the rest of the days of the Chag, Adam yotze yedei chvato belulavo shel chavero. He could be yotze with the lulav of your friend. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Yom Tov HaRishon shel Chag. This is another halacha over here. So Rabbi Yossi holds that Yom Tov HaRishon shel Chag shechal להיות b'Shabbat. If Shabbat is the first day of Sukkot, ושכח להוציא את הלולב, and you forgot that it's Yom Tov, that it's Shabbat rather, and you took your lulav and you went out to the Reshut HaRabim, you went to shul with your lulav, patur mipnei shehotzio b'reshut. He is patur because he took it out b'reshut. What does that mean, b'reshut? So Rashi says, b'reshut doesn't mean that he was allowed to do that. Chas v'shalom. What that means is that he is so excited for doing the mitzvah. B'reshut mitzvah, shaya tarud b'mitzvah. He was so fatumult. He was thinking about the mitzvah. Umechashev ve'asuk umemaher. He is thinking, he's occupied, he's taken by the thought of doing the mitzvah so excitedly that he forgot it's Shabbat today, right? He's just thinking about first day of Chag HaSukkot being the Yom Tov, not the Shabbat element of it that falls to be this year on Shabbat. V'shachach shehu Shabbat v'kasavar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion, we don't pass it like this, but Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that ta'ab dvar mitzvah, if you made a mistake in a mitzvah, and you ended up with an avera v'shagag v'shogeg, unintentionally, you were over an avera that had you done it b'mezid, you would be chayav karet. Now that you did it b'shogeg, out of the excitement for mitzvah that you forgot it was Shabbat and b'shogeg, you did it, patur mi korban. You don't have to bring korban. In other words, usually when you're mechal Shabbat b'shogeg, you have to bring korban, right? Chazal said, don't read in the light of a candle on Shabbat, lest you got to come to tilt it. Rabbi Yishmael said, it's not going to happen to me. Right? It's a big mistake to think that you could outsmart Chachamim. This is Rabbi Yishmael, the Tanah Rabbi Yishmael. It says, it's not going to happen to me. He read, and lo and behold, in the middle, he got so involved, he tilted the thing, and he wrote in his private pinkas, he said, me, Yishmael ben Isha, when Beit HaMikdash is going to be built, I am going to be bringing a chatat shemena, a fat korban chatat, because of this. So he said, Shabbat, b'shogeg, and he did, even though the Talmud Torah also is mitzvah, but the Maseh, it's not, that is the takana, and therefore, he was, when you do a thing that's chayav karet, or chayav mito b'shogeg, you will be patur according to Rabbi Yossi. But again, you see over here that Rabbi Yossi says you'll be patur because you were doing it out of the excitement for the mitzvah. Fine. So that's our Mishnah. Minan Amidi, says the Gemara, how do I know this halacha that a person has to have their own lulav etrog hadas v'arava set on Yom Tov Rishon shel Chag HaSukkot? The Tanu Rabbanan, because we learned ulkachtem, when the pasuk says ulkachtem lachem beyom harishon, that the first day of Sukkot you are going to take the arba minim and be happy in front of Hashem. The language that doesn't say velakachta says ulkachtem. The plural form is telling you that every person needs their own lekicha. Every person needs to have their own lulav etrog hadas v'arava. So says Rashi, how do I know that you're not yotze with the lulav of your friend? Because it says every person should be taking their own lulav. Now, says the Gemara, lachem is coming to tell you, mi shelachem, leotzi et shaul. So first of all, the Rishonim explained this. What does it mean? What's the hava amina? Why do you have to say that everyone should take their own? And the Meiri explains that there's a hava amina here, that maybe I could make a shaliach. This is a platform for tremendous amount of halachic rate, and that a person cannot make shaliach be mitzvah shebegufo. If I have to put on tefillin, I can't say, oh, today I don't feel like it. Can you please, here's $20. Can you put on tefillin? You can't do that, right? You can't do any mitzvah that your goof has to do. You cannot make a shaliach. You can't say, I have to sleep in sukkah. I'm cold a little bit. You go sleep in the sukkah instead of me. You can't do that. But you shake lulav for me. So that is what's coming to be taught here, says the Meiri, that maybe you would have thought you could make a shaliach over here. It says, no, ulkachtem, every person should have to do their own lekicha. And then when it says shlachem, shlachem means it has to be your lulav. You can't borrow somebody else's lulav etrog hadas v'arava and shake that. You have to have your own set of arba minim. So says the Gemara, and when it says, you can't borrow, you can steal, it has to belong to you. From here Chazal said, you cannot fulfill your obligation with the lulav of your friend. It has to be yours. Unless he gave it to you with matana. Now, matana works. It doesn't have to be that you went and you bought it for 1,000 coins, as we're going to see in a second. But you could borrow matana al menat la'achzir. You could get a gift as long as the moment that I'm shaking this lulav, it halachically 100% belongs to me. I'm allowed to do it. So says the Gemara, it was a story. Now we're standing on Erev Pesach. This is the famous names of Chachamim that will get together always. So they would travel together as well. So this is the same. Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva. Right, the Tarfon is missing over here. Shayu ba'in b'sfina. They were traveling on a ship together. V'ra'aya lulav ela Rabban Gamliel. Only Rabban Gamliel had a set of arba minim, because that year, you think nowadays is expensive. Back then, to buy the only set that was available for them to buy, shelekacho be'elef zuz. He had to pay 1,000 coins for getting that set of arba minim. And what happened was, netalo Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel took it. He shook his lulav. Ve'yatzabo, he was yotze. Ve'netano Rabbi Yehoshua b'matana. He gave it to Rabbi Yehoshua b'matana. He gave it to him b'matana. Netalo Rabbi Yehoshua ve'yatzabo. He took it and he shook the lulav. He was yotze. Ve'netano Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Then he gave it to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah b'matana as a gift. Now he took it. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah took it, was Yotze with it. Netano b'matana Rabbi Akiva. He gave it b'matana to Rabbi Akiva, and now Rabbi Akiva took it from him. V'yatzabo. By the way, this comes to tell you the order. You remember when we did earlier on, when we studied the story of the transfer of power from Rabban Gamliel to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. We explained this, and before Gemara, a few dapim earlier also, we explained the greatness of Rabbi Yoshua. It seems from all these Gemarot that Rabbi Yoshua was the greatest after Rabban Gamliel, really in the list. You can't imagine someone that's even greater than Rabbi Akiva in that way. You know, that tells you something. Here, going down the chain of command, is first Rabbi Gamliel takes it. Who's the first person he gives it to after himself? Is Rabbi Yeshua. Then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, which perhaps may have been the Nasi at the time, and then only then afterwards to Rabbi Akiva. So it's something to think about. And obviously we explained why Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol was not part of this count, even though that the Mishnah says Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol was greater than all of them, perhaps in some sense. But nevertheless, this is the story that happened on a ship. You also have to, parenthetically, you also have to deal with another question, and that is, earlier on, Rabbi Elazar was the one that said, right? He was not a big proponent of people going to be away from the family. And this is first day of Sukkot, and they're on a ship. Maybe they were there with their families. And, it's not a raya necessarily, but that's a parenthesis to think about for something. But nevertheless, what happened afterwards is, the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva took this, he was yotze with it, and then he gave it back to Rabban Gamliel. So he went through a whole circle, from Rabban Gamliel to Rabbi Yeshua, from Rabbi Yeshua to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, from Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah to Rabbi Akiva, and then he went back to Rabban Gamliel. So says the Gemara. Rabban Gamliel, he returned it to Rabban Gamliel. Why do you have to say, Lama li lememar echziro? Why do you have to tell me that at the end Rabbi Akiva returned it to Rabban Gamliel? He's teaching us a side point. He's teaching us a side point that matana al menat lachzir shema matana. Not only if they gave it as mamash and matana that it works. Tell you, here it is, chazak baruch, yours. Now, I can't take it back even if I gave it to you, because it's yours now. Halachically, monetarily, it's yours. But even if I stipulate a tanai to my matana, I say, this is matana, but on condition that you return it to me intact. So you say, well, is it mine in the meantime or not? Is it considered halachically mine in the meantime? I have to return it at some point. If I don't return it, it's not going to be mine now even. And says the Gemara, that's exactly the chidus of this maaseh, that as long as you're giving full authority over it to someone, even if you stipulate a tanai, that you must return this to me back intact, still it will be a complete matana, halachically speaking. In the meantime, when it is in the hand of your friend, it's considered his. So says the Gemara, Kamash malad matanar madachzir shema matara ki hada amar Rava. And this is like what we learned in the name of Rava. Halach etrog ze. This should be your etrog. Al menat shetachazirehu li. On condition that you should return it back to me afterwards. Netalo veyatzabo. If you took it and you were yotze with it. Hechziro yatza. If you return it to the owner, then you are yotze, you're yidechova. If you deviated from the stipulated tanai, the condition, lo hechziro, lo yatza. Because that nullifies the original matana that he gave you, because you deviated from it. Said, this is matana al menat, on condition, this is going to be yours for now, on condition that at some point you return it to me. So if you didn't return it, you ate it. You said, this is a beautiful etrog, right? It's gishmak for a jam. and you ate it. Then, in retrospect, you were never Yotzei your Chiyuv because it nullified the matara from the beginning. So this is a matara to you on condition you return it to me. So that's going to be a condition that you have to keep. If you end up keeping the condition, the matara in the meantime was yours. It was a matara. If you don't end up fulfilling the condition, then it was never yours. You stole.
Wasn't it Rabbi Yeshua's responsibility to return it to him, not Rabbi Akiva?
Well, so that's a good question. And you could say that when at the end you stand there, right? At the end you stand there, when I am obligated to give it to you, who are obligated to give it to him, who is obligated to give it to him, who is obligated to give it to me, so just keep it, right? You could just do that math in your hand and say, look, we're all in agreement, they're all there, right? That, I owe you and you owe him and he owes him and he owes him, I just pay the last person and everyone is patur. You don't have to actually hand it over through the chain. You could just give it to the last person. It's a great diuk, and that's what it seems to be saying in the Gemara. So says the Gemara, and why do you have to tell me that he bought it for 1,000 zuz? Well, who cares how much he paid? It's inflation, like you want to make us feel bad that nowadays it's cheaper or more expensive. Look at how precious the mitzvot were for them, that they were willing to spend 1,000 zuz, 1,000 coins on a set of arba minim, and that's what the Gemara is teaching. It's mitzvot archavim. This is our life. Now this starts a whole new sugya, which is geschmack and really, really involved. So it says, more the son of more about Amemar Ravashi, the son of Amemar says to Ravashi, Abba, my father Amemar, Salu Yikame Saleh. He would daven with the lulav in his hands. He loved the lulav and took so much, he wouldn't put it down. He would, of course, take it and do the nanuim and whatever, but then he would daven with it afterwards. He's davening Shemona Esrei, and he's holding the lulav in his hands, and he's davening to indicate how much he loved it. He wouldn't want to put it down even. What's the risk? Is that mutter to do? So says the Gemara, Meitve, they asked the Beit Midrash, Lo yochas adam tefillin biyado v'sefer Torah becheko. You should not be holding a tefillin in your hand or sefer Torah in your arms, v'yitpalel and daven with them, right? V'lo yashtin b'ayim, you can't urinate with them. V'lo yishan b'ayim, you can go to sleep holding them. Lo shenat keva, v'lo shenat arai, not a full on sleep, not even take a little nap. And the Gemara says, Abba Shmuel says, Sakin, v'ka'ara, a knife or a bowl, kikar, a loaf of bread, umaot, money, hare lukayotzebayim. These are also included. You cannot be holding any of these things in your hand and davening at the same time. The Gemara says, no, it's different. Hatam, lav mitzvah ninu. Those are not mitzvah to do. Right? Even tefillin, which you do a mitzvah with it, but it's not a mitzvah to hold on tefillin in your hand or sefer Torah in your hand, and therefore it's going to be tarid bu. You're going to be fatumol. You're going to be distracted with them, and it's not good. Hacha, you're going to be careful not to drop them, and so on and so forth. There's different additional things that we have to discuss in this sugya. But hacha mitzvah ninu. Here, every second you're doing a mitzvah. It's chibub mitzvah, and therefore it does not distract you, v'lo tarid behu, and therefore it would be mutar, which opens the door for us to discuss this a little bit more, Be'ezrat Hashem, in the days to come.